Microsoft solutions, especially related to the software-defined Azure Stack HCI, this is what we focus on. This is what we believe is about. Can you give us kind of the state of the union? What's going on? Is people using it? What's going on?
There is so much going on right now, and before we even do that, I just want to take a moment to we recognize kind of the new world we're currently living in right now, where we're doing remote like this. I think it's really awesome to see IT all over the world right now has really mobilized. If there's something we've seen at Microsoft in talking with our customers, is clearly there's been a huge shift. IT had to shift immediately to make sure, hey, we're ready to meet our customers and to provide remote services everywhere. And it's not like companies haven't been doing this. I know you've worked with these customers that are using virtual desktops or having, setting up remote capabilities and using Azure Stack HCI and branch offices and data centers on all of these things. But, up until, for many companies, remote was, hey, I need to support, a small percentage of my organization, like the sales team or some of the outbound folks. And what's really happened is now the entire company has had to shift. And all of a sudden, we are seeing, IT has had they've had new challenges. They've never had a strain on their networking or their infrastructure like they've had before, because, they're used to a lot of people just coming into the office and working right there. And now people are working from all over, working from home, working in different environments. Currently, you're working in front of your office there at DataON. And so IT has had to deal with these different challenges. And I have to say, just a huge shout out to everybody, all of the IT pros everywhere. You guys are doing a fantastic job. I mean, it's just amazing how people have just realized, okay, it's part of my job. I'm just going to roll with it. I'm going to do my absolute very best. We are going to be open-minded. We are not going to just stop everything we're doing. We are going to, we're going to make sure that we can deliver. And when it comes to Azure Stack HCI, what's amazing to me is, number one, people were already talking about their digital transformation. They were trying to figure out what they were doing in terms of their applications and how they were going to modernize them. And in some cases, they were like, yeah, we're moving some of this cloud, but there's a bunch of things that are going to stay on premises. And you know what? We need to figure out how we modernize those. And in fact, I remember speaking to a customer a couple months ago that was basically saying, for them, SQL, their database was a critical part of their organization. It was just a key part of everything they were doing, and they were really proud of the fact that they had a 12-node cluster, and it was a couple of graybeards. Let's just say that a couple of graybeards that had been DBAs for a long time and really, really good at their craft. And they were telling me, they said, we got a 12-node cluster, and they were really proud of how well it was in terms of performance and reliability. And I said, great. I said, have you considered an HCI solution? And they said, well, we don't know about the performance. And I said, well, tell me about what you have today. It's a 12-node solution, 12 nodes attached to a traditional kind of a SAN environment. And I said, what's your IOPS performance? And they were like, oh, yeah, we're getting almost 500,000 IOPS. I said, that's pretty cool. That's a nice solution from a few years ago. You realize the state of the art today. You realize that you could do 4 nodes, in 4U that can deliver over a couple million IOPS. And they were, what? Okay, and it was like, yeah, you need to rethink about that and take a look at what's out there. And what on top of that, what they really appreciated was the fact that, like, wow, this is so much easier to manage too. And I don't need to deal with traditional SAN. And so what we've seen a lot of people using Stack HCI has been, and many times it's just, you know what, we're going to retire the traditional SAN. We're going to move to a new modern system. We're going to take advantage of all this flash that's available that's so much easier to manage. And I have the option to hook up to Azure for hybrid capabilities, for backup and stuff like that. But honestly, just the fact that it's so much easier. And I think this is an area where, honestly, I've spoken to many of your DataON customers, and that's one of the things that they appreciate most from you guys is your fantastic support and the fact that it is easy to get it set up and running, and not spending a ton of time trying to, hey, you know what? Do I have to go figure out the parts? Do I have to figure out how to put all this together? You guys create the solution. You ship them the solution. They're up and running the same day, and they're just going. And so we've still seeing a tremendous Azure Stack HCI adoption is off the hook. And in fact, even during this challenging time, we've been updating things like Admin Center, delivering a whole bunch of value. That hasn't stopped. That's just been continuous.
That's really good. I think today, in this virtual meetup, we have many of our current customers, and we actually have a lot of probably new people that doesn't know about the technology, but we wanted to know. But I think it's good to make sure that we have an open discussion on whatever topic it is. I think one thing that, without putting you spot, and I will, is that, hey, we're not going to see you at Ignite in November. I know there's a lot of stuff you guys are doing. Without even spilling the beans, can you give us a forward-looking? What does it look like for Microsoft in the next 3 to 9 months, where the Ernie of the world, the Chris of the world, the Paul of the world, they kind of know, but they don't know, but you can't say it. But give us something to get excited about.
There is so much happening right now. Like I said, Microsoft, we have not stopped. We're just working in a different way. And again, a lot of us, we've been working remotely for a while and have had, the ability to work remote in the office. Let's just start with Admin Center. Just real quickly, Admin Center hasn't stopped at all. We released a huge release at Ignite a few months ago, and we actually just came out with an updated release just a few weeks ago. If you look at the release that came out at Ignite, there was huge capabilities added for virtual machines, for live migrations, for tags, for all sorts of stuff. The HCI cluster creation wizard, new networking capabilities, new hybrid capabilities. It's a whole bunch of things we added at Admin Center in the 1910 release. One of the really interesting bits of feedback we got, and I spoke to actually a number of customers at Ignite, was that people are using Admin Center and deploying it in huge scale. Like when we first launched Admin Center, I'd have people say, what's the limit? Can I do 500 VMs, 500 OSs, 1,000? I was running into people at last Ignite that were like, yeah, we have over 20,000 machines we're managing with Admin Center. We put it on a server, we're using it in a gateway mode, it's clustered, we have like 10 admins, they're managing literally over 20,000 OSs around the world. It's the greatest thing ever, we love it. And we knew that people were using Admin Center at massive scale. I didn't realize just how many people were doing it. And so we took a little time after Ignite to say, okay, you know what? With this many people and this much feedback, we need to do some work under the hood. We need to do some work under the covers to make sure we can scale to some of these really large deployments. And guess what? People are asking us, can we go to 50,000? Can we go to 100,000? Is there any sort of inherent limit? And honestly, we haven't put any sort of limit in Admin Center. As long as you got it on a fast enough box and it's really lightweight, you're going to be pretty much fine. But we did some work under the covers in 1910 for exactly that. We also put in 1910.2, and we actually added some new features as well. One of my favorite ones, it's a simple little thing. It really is. But it makes a huge difference, especially when you're managing server core, is like you can now copy and paste files right there in the files tool. So if you're managing server core remotely, which I'm doing every single day, I'm managing some servers back at the office. They're all running server core. Guess what? I'm using Admin Center and I'm literally copying files, and it's all happening remotely. It's super simple. It's super easy. And the fact that I'm running server core doesn't matter. So we made some changes to that. One of the other things is the new Azure Security Center. So we did some more hybrid integration. We released an Azure Security Center plugin at Ignite that was in preview. It is now GA. So now we have more capabilities. So for people that are running Azure Security Center in the cloud and want to use it to manage, for example, they've got DataON systems running in a variety of locations and want to have one way to manage them all from a security standpoint, they can do that. And so it's giving that clarity around management to manage both my Azure cloud and my on-prem and making Azure that single control plane. And so this kind of leads to one of the other investments we made at Ignite. And I can't get into too much detail today, but let me just tell you, here's an area of big investment for us, which was Azure Ark. Okay. Azure Ark was I couldn't wait to tell people about this at Ignite. Ark is basically, we want to make Ark a standard way to be able to manage all of your operating systems, all of your Windows Server, all of your Linux running anywhere. And that's a really powerful statement. So again, we run into people that say, yeah, we've got a data center, we've got branch offices, say we've got, 100 or 500 locations all around the world, and we want to manage these in a consistent way. And sure, some of it's going to be in the public cloud, and some of it's going to be on-prem, but we want to manage it in a consistent way. And so the example I always give, and it's an example I started with at Ignite, is think about identity. Okay, identity is a perfect example, identity and governance. So I was at Ignite at about 5,000 people in one of my sessions, and I asked a real simple question: how many of you use Active Directory to manage your servers? And people, I could see people in the audience kind of looked at me like, that's a crazy question. And of course, like 5,000 hands went up. And then I said, okay, so how do you guys manage policy on your Windows servers? How many of you use group policy? And of course, like, people gave me this weird look, and of course 5,000 hands went up. And so here's the point. Group policy in Azure and Active Directory are the standard ways to manage identity and policy and governance for your Windows servers. But that's great. And that's what people have been doing for the last 20 years. And that works great if you're using Windows Server and if you're doing it in a domain. What happens if it's Windows Server that's not in a domain, or if it's Linux? So how do you manage governance for that? And how do you manage that for the stuff that's running in the cloud, in different environments, in VMs, on physical, on premises, in different clouds? And like, as I was looking out in the audience, I could see people start to get pale, because like, oh yeah, this is a huge problem. I mean, how do you do this? That's what Ark is designed to do. With Ark, now we can say, hey, guess what? You've got your servers located everywhere. Guess what? You can provide management and governance from Azure, apply that policy down, and guess what? You can manage it and see it everywhere. And so one of the big things we're working on right now is massive Ark integration. And so we want to make sure that wherever you're deploying your operating systems, whether it's, again, in the cloud or on premises on new DataON gear, guess what? You have visibility. You can manage it consistently as you build policy. So for example, today people build policy and group policy, and then they push that policy down. Well, as you build policy, and by the way, Azure has a whole bunch of policy already there. Like, we've already created hundreds, if not thousands of policies already there. If you want to use and push those down, we will give you the ability to push those down everywhere. So Azure Ark is one of those areas that you're going to see lots of integration with Azure Ark and Stack HCI to get consistency around management, governance, and policy. And so that's one cool area. And then of course for Stack HCI, holy cow, there is so much we are working on. There's a lot of innovation going on right now in the hardware areas. There's a lot of innovation that we have learned, of course, in running Azure in the cloud that we are bringing on premises. There's a lot of things. So just to give you kind of one thing that I won't get too much trouble for talking about, but GPU partitioning. Okay, this is something we have in Azure. This is something that we are utilizing in Azure. People are loving it. They love the ability that they can create VMs up there in Azure, and they could say, give me GPU partitioning right into the VM. Not a virtual processor, but a real GPU. Okay. All right. Yeah. Guess what? That is absolutely something that's coming to Stack HCI, and it's something we are very much understand. There's a lot of really cool things we want to do there, and so we want to take the learnings that we have from Azure and bring those into Azure Stack HCI on-prem. That's just one example.
Yeah, I can see a lot of innovation that's going to happen to really bridge the concept of on-premise solution and really leveraging Azure and Azure Cloud. I think there's so many people here today on the virtual meetup that has different questions, but I think I would say, Ernie, you're probably one of the early adopters. We started engaging about 3 years ago, even earlier, and you've been a Microsoft shop for a while, but you're one of the early people that found a lot. You were like famous for finding bugs in the early 2016 days. I'm not sure that's a good way to get famous by Microsoft. I think you're on the blacklist for a while for Microsoft. Be honest. Ernie's on blacklist with a lot of people. It's okay. He's okay with that.
So, spoiler alert, but from previous to my Microsoft days, I worked in QA, I worked in test. So I have a special place in my heart for people that find bugs, and trust me, I'm the guy that will spend the late hours in the office testing, finding bugs, and breaking stuff on our own products at Microsoft, and I enjoy it. So thank you, Ernie. Really appreciate it. Always give us feedback, please.
We had a rough early adaptation, but the support that we ended up getting once we got in the right hands, and this is very early STD days. I don't even know if customer support was like fully vetted and trained on the product, and because it was so green.
You were an early adopter.
Oh yeah, we were right out the gate, like probably running. I think we had TP5 in production when we shouldn't have. It was a fun run, but things got sorted out, and it's we find things, we report them, and I would say 90% of the people in this chat right now have probably gone through a similar pain at some point, and that's why we have such a solid community, because of the sharing of information, the knowledge wealth that we're willing to, bounce ideas off of each other and say, hey, are you feeling this pain? Do you have this? Did you run this update? Did it fix X? Did it fix Y? So it's fun to see this community grow that I would say 5-10 years ago wasn't. I don't think it would have been possible, and it's kind of, we all have this camaraderie now because of this product. So that is
awesome.
There's a fun thing that's come out of this. What's that?
Ernie, we want to know, what are you trying to test and break recently?
What am I breaking?
Trying to test and break recently?
I'm currently breaking dedupe. I'm pounding the heck out of dedupe on a 3-tier, couple 3-tier STD systems. And I want to just preface this by saying dedupe has literally, I think the term I used to Howard last night was it has saved our bacon and our wallets. We before 2019 ReFS deduplication was introduced, we were running, like you said, 2016. We had a couple 4-node clusters, a boatload of storage, but again, in that cheap and deep kind of setup where very small cache, a little bit bigger SSD tier, and then a massive HDD tier. And we spec'd this out years ago when, in early 2017 or late 2016, and we didn't think the storage consumption would be what it is. And all of a sudden, 90% of the reads and writes are coming from spinning Rust. And it was like, what do we do other than just throw more money at the hardware? And thankfully we hit that, not to use a term that's been overused lately, but we hit that peak in the curve of storage consumption and IO right as 2019 was going GA, and we immediately were like, let's go, upgrade in place. We don't even care. Like we tested it on a couple boxes, we saw it worked fine, made some new volumes, and we just started migrating VHDXs over to that, and dedupe was a lifesaver. And just to give you an idea, we are at each volume that we run is spec'd out for about, let's just say 5 terabytes, and we have 10 of those volumes in our clusters. We're saving about 80% storage. Like before this meeting, I went on one of my clusters and I typed, get dedupe volume, and I was like, let me just see and it's like, 70%, A68, 75% savings utilization. So we literally doubled our capacity just by enabling ReFS dedupe. And again, in the S2D world, that's not just, oh, you're saving some money on some spinning disk. No, those reads and writes are coming from faster storage now. It's not getting destaged as quickly. So if you're in that world where you are not flat cache or a flat NVMe or flat flash, that it is a godsend. But like I said, I am trying to break it because I have flown a little too close to the sun even in this setup now. So it's we're going to probably have to add some new hardware to these, like additional nodes to these clusters, just because we're hitting dedupe uses resources. It's not inline, it's not real time. So when those dedupe jobs are on, we use resources. We have a lot of VMs running. There's some contention for RAM and IO and CPU. So we're experimenting with some fun stuff. And
are you still using spinning disks and SSD, or is your plan to keep the hard drives around for capacity?
So yes, we are still using SSD, 3-way mirrors for both tiers. So we're using SSD and HDD in both tiers, 3-way at least. We moved away from MRV or MAP just because there were some early 2017 issues that we just never felt comfortable going back to, which I know have been resolved, but we just never remade the volumes because we didn't care.
Okay.
And yes, the plan would be, if we, like I mentioned, we're going to be adding additional nodes to these clusters to scale out a little bit more. And as we add more storage to the pool, we'll be able to one by one rip out an HDD in each server, balance, rip out another HDD, balance, dedupe, and it's not a quick process. It's going to take us a month probably to run through that whole thing, because this, again, it's an in-production system, but I've done it before. It works. It's painless. I am not unlucky enough to suffer any hardware issues or any cluster outages during this. So we feel comfortable doing it, and it is fairly easy to do, especially with the available tool set that's out there. And not to blow smoke up wax rear end, but Windows Admin Center has been a godsend when it comes to that type of stuff, just from a visual quick look type of thing. Yeah, it's where I'm comfortable in PowerShell. I'm significantly faster in Windows Admin Center when it comes to certain things, and that is one of them: monitoring physical disks, evicting stuff, and turning on and off dedupe at a cluster scale. So that has been very beneficial for me.
I'm not sure, Ernie. I would recommend our majority of our customer to do all these things you do in production. I think you're kind of the few that I know has a pretty high risk tolerance, but I'm glad to see that it works. But for sure, as we continue to expand and change, make sure you could take it offline a little bit and make sure it works. But I know many of the people. There's a lot of people, and guys, this is a virtual meetup. I don't want myself or Jeff or Ernie to be talking all day. If you want to chat, just jump out and chat, and I'm gonna shut up and not do anything, because the goal is for you guys to have this forum and we could just talk. Anybody want to chime in on anything, any topic?
I do want to make one quick comment. Okay. I thought Ernie made a really great point that a lot of people tend to overlook. We tend to, at Microsoft, we tend to talk about deduplication for the cost savings because it's a real tangible one, and it's something you can easily sell your boss on when it's time to make the purchase. But you bring up a really good point that it's also about performance, because you're exactly right. Once that stuff is deduped, if more of that can actually live in the hot tier or in the cache, then actually your performance goes up, because you're not because you're reading dedupe data over and over again. So there actually is a very tangible performance benefit depending on how much of that is being, instantly accessed. But that's a great point. Yeah, if there are other questions, I'm definitely listening.
Hey, so Howard knows us well. We have like 7 S2D clusters with DataON, and my manager and I don't know, Ellen Kirby, I don't know if that name shouts out to you, Jeff. She just started working at Microsoft one Monday.
Wow.
But, yes, I know. So she'll be doing some S2D stuff. But we really love the S2D deployment stuff. But when it comes to cluster node redundancy, having 2 4-node clusters, you can use memory accelerated parity, cluster sets are between 19, that's great. But, if you're going to use any type of dual parity with 16 nodes, that's of course not good on a fault domain perspective. So will Microsoft be increasing the node redundancy with the larger nodes?
That is definitely something we are looking at. S2D has some of that stuff plumbed in. There's that capability actually resides under the hood. We would need to do some testing and validation on it. Let me ask you, what is there a target you'd like to see?
Well, I think of things like cohesity. So that's secondary storage, completely different what we're talking about. But they have unlimited scalability, scale-out capability. So you can have hundreds of clusters. Now, obviously, that's not necessarily good.
Unlimited.
Right? You can't test unlimited. You can have a couple hundred in the same cluster, but you can't test unlimited. But to have an option that says, I'm going to have, an 8-node cluster, and I want to be able to tolerate a 2-node failure, but also I want to be able to tolerate a couple hard drives out in 2 other nodes, something like that. So not necessarily fault tolerance at the node level, but also at the hard drive level. So you can still, have 2 nodes fail, but then a hard drive fail and something else. So kind of like the way nested resiliency works with 2 nodes, but expanded out beyond 2 nodes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And there's always this balancing act and trade-off. And you bring up a great point, because on the one hand, there are some folks that go, well, I want you to maximize the storage. I want to be able to use as much as possible. And then there's some that go, but I want maximum resiliency. And you got to kind of find that where's the right level, what's the right ratio of balance in there. And so let me ask you this. So what's a common node deployment you said you had for you?
So, for example, we have a 6-node cluster, but if we were to add a 7th node or an 8th node, well, the more you add, technically, the less redundancy you have in that cluster. And if you want to, and we're using mirror accelerated parity, so although you can achieve a greater storage efficiency for dual parity, starting with 7 nodes in our configuration, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right choice. What we're wanting to do is actually deploy 2 new 4-node clusters, only NVMe SSDs. That would be ideal, and then you use that the 6-node cluster somewhere else. But it would be great so that when you add more nodes, well, really the ideal spot 4-node, right? You have mirror accelerated parity, and I guess you can do 6 nodes if you want delimited throughway mirrors. But beyond that, beyond 6 nodes, if you ever want to ensure a good redundancy, that's where I would really like to see those options where you can still have a hard drive fill in another node while 2 other nodes are down.
Got it. So you're looking for basically 6 nodes and higher, 2 nodes can go down, and a drive can go down in a 3rd node, and you're still good.
Right.
Okay. I will capture that note here. And,
Ernie's smiling, so I really want to know what he's thinking.
Oh no, I think it's great. I would love it to be dynamic. I'm smiling because I know there's a few other folks on the chat that are probably like either nodding their head or shaking their head or coming up, and I'm just running through scenarios in my head. That's all. I was hoping my thumbnail wasn't up there anymore, that you couldn't see me, but yeah, no, that'd be great. I have a similar issue too. I'm not as, like I said, I only have 4 nodes in my clusters, but I did the opposite. Instead of scaling a 4-node to a 6-node or an 8-node, I just was like, no, I'm going to keep 2 4-nodes separately. And if I do this again, I'm going all flat NVMe. So I'm kind of laughing about that too, because I'm like, I went down this path.
And this is actually a question I'm glad we're having, because this is a question I'd like to ask you. Is there, when I look at, when you think about how you want to scale, would you prefer to do multiple 4-node chunks, just keep adding 4-node chunks, another 4, another 4, another 4, or do you want to keep adding to the same cluster? Because I actually feel like I get conflicting answers from people on this. So do you deploy a cluster and then a new cluster after that, another one?
I mean, in my opinion, 2 4-nodes is better, or I guess 3 4-nodes would be better than 2 6-nodes. But if you ever increase the storage efficiency, so it's greater than 50% for dual parity, when you get up to, so you don't need like 7 nodes, then that's where I might be inclined to do more 6-node deployments, and I would still be fine with a fault domain, 2 nodes at 2. I would be fine, and I would just do a lot of 6 nodes. But as long as the storage efficiency between 4 and 6 is the same, I don't think I gain much unless I want to use a combination of mirror accelerated parity and delimiting the allocation of throughway mirrors. So otherwise, I would just do a bunch of 4 nodes.
Okay. And Ernie, you agree with that?
Yeah, but I mean, I also feel like everyone's going to have a unique answer here, and I think, Paul, maybe you're suggesting flexibility to be baked into the product for these different scenarios. And I don't want to put words in your mouth if I'm interpreting that wrong, but I know from some physical appliances that Commvault used to sell, it was only really sellable in 3-node deployments. And I can remember hearing customers say, that's real crappy that we need to buy things in 3 nodes at a time when we only need just a smidgen of that right now. So I think back to that type of feedback I've heard from other customers from a somewhat similar product. And I say, don't go down one path, but give us the option. Maybe not expose it in a GUI that can confuse people, but give people at least the ability to manipulate these things and maybe custom and fine tune things. If they're power users, so to speak. Me personally, I've done both. I've scaled a cluster up by one node at a time, or I've just Howard send me another 4 nodes because I need a new cluster. I've done both. So different solutions.
On the same topic, Paul, are you gonna be thanking Ernie a bit if he makes it work? And Jeff, don't if I say this one. So want to challenge many of your customers, a lot of you out there, including you, Paul, because you have a 6 node that's about 2 years old, all flash SSD, but you need to expand it. However, as the technology continues to expand with platform and Intel coming out with Whitney solution coming at the end of the year, platform will change, CPU changes, NVMe version changes. One of the things that Microsoft says, and again, Jeff, not to put anything in your word, hey, this is software-defined storage. Doesn't matter what the hardware is, as long as it balances. And DataON prides itself that says, hey, we should offer the customer the best of the best at that time. One of the challenges that Ernie is facing today, and many of you are facing today, is you might have deployed a first-generation server that's on a V4 processor, not even a Xeon. And now we're on the 3rd generation Xeon Gen 2. But how is it possible I can expand additional node if these servers and processors not available today? Is it possible to just add another node that's different generation, three generation of Xeon, and memory is different, the drive's different, and still work in adding the same cluster? And Ernie, you has been chosen by DataON to take that task because we got to give you the latest technology, latest NVMe, latest CPU to add to your cluster 3 years ago, and you're gonna see if it works. Correct?
Yes, sir. And we talked about all the options available, whether we were going to get some JBODs and partition them up. But yeah, we decided to just get a 5th server that's a completely different platform altogether, and just, hey, let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? We've already. Like, we're not doing this from a VM perspective. We have enough RAM, so we're not too concerned about live migration flakiness between different gen processors. But I need the storage, and I need the storage now. So that's going to solve that problem, at least until we come up with a migration plan to a different set of hardware that isn't fully installed yet. But yeah, this is another thing. And again, it is available because Microsoft just basically says, do the drives kind of match the workload? All right, are you on the same cumulative update? Are you running the same NICs? Are you doing RDMA the right way? Then it should be fine. Just don't expect things to, like these VMs may be a little slower here than if they were here. But that's kind of self-explanatory.
Right. Symmetry is actually really important. I think it's something, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, so I won't spend too much time on this, but it's something that, especially, in running it at massive scale with Azure, when we deploy stamps, it's, literally thousands of servers, and they are literally identical. So, we understand that on-prem it's a little bit different. People don't deploy at that scale, and sometimes availability of parts, and like, hey, guess what? You had an older system from a few years ago, and now you're on a newer system, and so you want to. So we try to trying to bridge that gap where you can run on a newer system if the tree is there, and just kind of make it work. One question I wanted to ask you is, in terms of storage, how are you guys thinking about storage these days? Is it you're still comfortable with hybrid where you're using traditional hard drives and or is that still spinning disks are still a thing, or are you guys moving to a world where SSDs are becoming your capacity play and NVMe is becoming your? I'm just kind of wondering about this. I'm seeing some things, but I tend to be a lot of enterprises talking to me.
Yeah, we're still using spinning disks for the bulk of our big storage, but all flash for our high compute, which I see really happening across the board.
Okay.
Which on that note, when bigger than 4 petabytes per cluster and bigger than 64 terabyte volume.
All right, I'll let you in on one more. Yes, we are working on that. We're going to be expanding beyond 4 petabytes in the next Azure Stack HCI. Yes, I'll let you in on that one. Yeah, that's something we've been very excited. Being supported 1 petabyte. 2019 supported 4. I know a bunch of folks that are deploying 1 and 4 petabyte solutions, and boy, I got to tell you, they're very happy. We want something a lot better. Oh my gosh! So yes, we're definitely expanding.
That's good to hear. A lot of customers are, believe it or not, they don't have a lot of customers that's pushing that limit. Even though we have a lot of 2 and edge and robo deployment, but clearly they're a lot of them they're still pushing that limit, and they're pushing you guys along to make sure that, because at the end of the day, they're coming from a traditional world, and traditional stack has some capabilities that they need to achieve, and I think you guys are definitely start to make sure these features is available to them. Any other? Come on, any other people? I saw.
Hey, Howard, Malik here with Point Click.
Oh, Malik!
How's it going, man?
Are you in Gambia right now, in Africa, or in North Carolina?
No, I'm actually in Spain right now, in Malaga.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just curious if anybody on the group is running a cluster switchless. I know we have a few quotes from you guys, but if there are any downsides to running like let's say a 2 or 3 node cluster without a switch, just to kind of see if there's any pros and cons to going switchless versus buying the switches as well.
Christopher, were you saying something? I think you're muted.
No, I'm just talking to my kids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is Mohit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So we are running both. We are running a 4-node system, which is with switches, and 2-node systems without switches, and we're actually pleased with both of them. So no problem there. I do have a couple of quick questions though. One is we are running our backbone on our RDMA traffic is 100 gig NICs and switches. It's nice, but the issue is we are not seeing any performance improvements at all with those. That's number one. And we are running these 4 nodes are running NVMe hard drives for performance, and we still have spinning drives behind them. So naturally, I think that kind of affects the performance. But we are actually, frankly, very surprised at this. That it should have achieved a little more higher performance on 100 gigs, which you're not seeing. That's number one. Number two is if we do have any repair or regeneration, even if one machine, for example, we're restarting and we had an issue last night and one machine rebooted while restarting out of 4 nodes, the repair is still going on after 40 hours. So just even a 30-second delay of the other machine to restart causes a repair process on 100 gig RDMA networks for 24 to 48 hours. So that also worries us, that why is those repair regeneration processes at such minor issues have such long durations.
Is that on spinning disk?
We don't, it's showing, if I do a storage job, it shows me that jobs are going on, but I don't see which disks it's doing it.
But are there spinning disks in the system?
Yes, there are spinning disks in the system. Okay, and then second is there any guidelines to, the machines from DataON can today take almost a terabyte or more terabyte of RAMs, which means a very nice processor from Intel. So we can run lots and lots of VMs on these things, especially with 24 NVMEs on top of it. So is there any limit to, or just, 50, 60 VMs, 100 VMs, good 8 gigs, 8 gig RAM VMs, generally not. Is there any things we think, practically speaking, is there some guidelines for that? I'm also going to add one more question while I'm talking, is backup situations. Now we use Veeam for backups there, and we are seeing that initial backups in a hybrid system with NVMEs and solid and hard drive systems can take really, really long time. So we also, is it the solid state? Is it the hard drives which are slowing down things in this case? Is my first question. And second is, what is your recommendation in terms of how many VMs are we safe? We are running about 40 VMs on each node right now.
Okay. So yeah, to all of my to a bunch of those questions is going to be hard drives. Keep in mind, just to provide a little bit of context, even the fastest spinning disks out there, like the very, very fast, if you went out and bought a 15,000 RPM SAS drive on a really, 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 really good day, if it is lining up perfectly, maybe you get 250 to 300 IOPS. Okay, like that is the fastest drive you can buy, 15,000 RPM. If you look at your NVMe, you're talking 2 orders of magnitude better. You're talking hundreds of thousands of IOPS for NVMe. So if this was just limited to your NV, if this was on all, even if it was just, even if it was not even, even if it was just SATA flash, which is still slower than NVMe, that flash would be just still an order of magnitude faster than your spinning disks. What I'm assuming is happening is because we have to do, we're basically doing the disk repair, we have to make sure that the most paramount thing for us is to not lose any data. And so we are going to make sure we go through all of your disks to make sure that everything is rebuilt properly. We're doing checksums, we're doing validate, we're validating everything to make sure everything's correct. And unfortunately, you know, we're going to hit the disks where those things reside, and that's taking so long. That's one of the reasons why I was kind of asking everyone what's their thoughts on Flash. And this is actually one of the things that I'm starting to run into, more people saying they're looking at moving what traditionally would have in a traditional disk to SATA flash, not NVMe, because you know NVMe is your highest performing. Think about it this way: SATA has a maximum limit of 550 megabytes. That's about theoretically as much as you can push through there. NVMe is, you know, like 3.5 gigabytes per second. So NVMe is like 6 times faster, and that's just because the interface to the flash is so much faster. So what you're doing is you're moving the bottleneck, but the spinning disk in this case is the bottleneck because, you know, SATA's not. You're never going to attack SATA with a spinning disk. So that's pretty sure what's happening there. In terms of your NIC, I can tell you I recently had an interesting case, kind of a related, but kind of an opposite case, where basically a customer was basically telling me they had a system. It wasn't a DataON system, it was another system, but basically they were doing some testing of the flash. So they had a kind of an average flash drive in the machine, and then they put in a brand new that had literally, I think it was a 3x performance improvement, and they then ran their benchmarks on it and saw no performance improvement. And their problem was that while they had increased the speed of the flash, they were doing this on 10 gig networks. So the 10 gig network was actually the bottleneck, because when they were doing their write tests, like literally the flash was waiting for the NIC to get everything done. So for them, I said, upgrade your NIC. And in fact, they went to a 50 gig NIC, and all of a sudden they saw their performance spike up. So that was finding and removing that bottleneck. In your case, I think what's happening is, in your case, the disk is the bottleneck. Your networks, I'm thrilled to hear that you got 100 gigabit, which means your NVMe is not going to be waiting around for the network. It means you've got plenty of headroom. When you look at most HCI, if you actually look at what the I/O characteristics are, they generally fall into 70% read, 30% write. You know, and so, you know, write intensive workloads, that's pretty uncommon. So in your case, you should be doing plenty good on your NICs, your storage. You've got NVMe flash. I don't know, in terms of your flash, do you happen to know how much flash you have versus how much hard drive do you have? Is it like, you know, what's that ratio look like? You're muted.
It's 30-70. 30%, 30 NVMe, 70% storage is hard drive.
Okay, so when you say you've got about 40 to 50 VMs running on there, then you're definitely exceeding the cache, and you're definitely running those on disks, and that's definitely causing what the rebuilds.
But when we look into VAC, Windows Admin Center, we are generally hitting 99% read cache capabilities. So we are generally even 100% read cache. So we know that these are pretty old data sitting on the bigger drives. But so good in that sense, we are touching mostly NVMEs and capacities are fine there. So, but I was just curious that even a delay of like I said, what was really strange to me was a reboot taking a system down for an extra minute or so. Runs the repairs very long, and that was really my question. That is it really supposed to be that long to repair them?
Well,
So
there's no one size fits all solution answer other than it depends on depends on your underlying storage subsystem. I'm sorry, was someone going to say something?
Yeah, Jeff, it's Ernie. I was just going to say, I know at Ignite, I know that there were some future improvements to the rebuild, resync, optimization stuff that are coming in vNext. I know that's been kind of like publicly announced at this point. So I don't know if everyone here is familiar with that, but I mean, that could also probably, depending on its data set and like the size of his pool and everything, that may also be playing into his rebuild times taking a while, and those improvements may be, something cool to talk about.
Yeah, I was going to so let me be clear. There's two parts to this. One is, like I said, hard drive, disks versus flash. In general, we are looking at this area all up. We are looking at ways that we can do rebuilds faster. We are looking at how we can parallelize the option a lot more. We're going to do some additional parallelization of the rebuilds to speed this up. But trust me, there is a point where the disk drives will continue to be, a challenge for us, because literally it's a function of how fast I can, wait for a spinning disk and a read write. I had to make a change on a spinning disk as it goes around. Yes, it is an area we are looking at improving ways that we can improve and make that faster in time.
Yeah, and just to add to what Jeff was saying, some of the improvements, and Stephen Ekron's the program manager that owns it. He was talking about this at Ignite. With the rebuilds the way they are now, 2016 and 2019, if a change is made to a block of data, we keep the blocks of data or the extent as either 256 meg or 1 terabyte. If one single thing changes about it, that entire block, the whole 256 meg or the whole 1 terabyte, is what actually gets copied back and rebuilt. So what we're doing now, or what we will be doing, I should say, is we're only going to take small chunks. Instead of the entire extent, we're only going to take a small chunk of it, and that's what's going to speed it up. So
John, just a quick comment here. John, just a quick comment. Just said 1 terabyte. It's 1 gigabyte. So it's 256.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so
I'm
it's sorry.
Gigabyte. Just so people don't think it's 1 terabyte that we have to resync. So it's the 1
My
gig.
mistake.
But remember, at the same time, your calling count also impact that. So again, if you look on what you can achieve when you have the HDDs, the maximum throughput you can expect in megabytes is less than maybe 500-600 megabytes in total, because on a good day, you can maybe out of one of your disks get 100 megabytes per second. That times 8, and then a little bit of overhead. So it's really slow on resyncing HDDs. So if you compared it, as Jeff was saying, onto the all flash, it's a huge difference. So your network, you will never see when you do resync on your 100 gig, you will maybe be able to reach, let's say 600-700 megabytes per second. But remember, you can have 1200 and 1.24 gig or 12 gig on the 100 gig. So it's a lot more that you could move, but you will never be able to do that with the HDDs.
Right.
So that's just how it is when you're using HDDs in a system like this. There are commands that you can use to see what is going on. Unfortunately, most of them you cannot run on big disk due to the limitation of PowerShell. But let's say we have demos where we are showing how to, let's say, monitor what is going on, and you can see how many extents that you still have to resync and stuff like that. And even the get storage job is doing a pretty nice job in 2019 to show you how much you still have to resync. And again, yeah, just a single byte that you change in one of those extents, the whole extent has to be copied. And that's the real problem. So just a quick reboot. If you have changed 1,000 of your extents, just a single byte, all of them has to be recopied again. So that's the challenge.
Right. And it's exactly right. It's a twofold problem. One, if this was, just, you're right, but if it makes one byte change, then we've got to copy it all. And on a hard drive, it's going to be way more impacted than on a SATA hard drive or NVMe. But like, we are exactly right. And by the way, for those who don't know, that's John Marlin. John, one of my colleagues. Thanks, John, for being on today in the storage and HA team. He's working on some really cool things as well. But that's exactly right. And we are not done looking at this. We want to definitely optimize this further.
And Jeff, this is Benjamin here. I had a question about cluster sets. So what do you see the future of cluster sets going forward? Is that something that you're like seeing people implement? And I've got a couple of reasons I'm asking for that.
Okay, so before I do that, I'm actually going to pass it on over to John. John is actually the PM who owns cluster sets. So John, let me let you take a first crack at this.
Cluster sets is something that we are looking at. Right now, it's all based off of scale. We don't reject it at any point right now to be any kind of a DR solution, which a lot of people are trying to make it to be. We've got other things in the works for our DR solutions. But we are looking at updating it. There are some lacking things about cluster sets that we are looking at for the next version of the Windows Server. So we haven't forgot about it. We have heard some of the comments and some of the feedback on what a lot of people would like to see. One of those being including some sort of UI for it. And we will be working with the Windows Admin Center team probably later in the summer or the fall on getting some of that added to it, along with some of the updates. Now, what were the specific questions that you had about it?
Well, I was just going to say one key thing to think about for cluster sets is, the fact that it creates a consistent namespace between clusters opens up all sorts of new possibilities and scenarios, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to open it up. We also wanted to get to a world where we could, I think there was a comment earlier about virtually unlimited scale. Well, one of the ways you do that is that you create what you can essentially call clusters of clusters with cluster sets. And as John points out, you're right, today there isn't a UI, and trust me, we've heard that as well. And it is something we are very much working on. John's working on with the admin center team to make sure that we address that, because we want to make it more readily available. But yeah, like John said, I'm kind of curious, Benjamin, is there a specific question or scenario that you're thinking about?
Yeah, there was one proposal that we were working on, and they were coming from VMware, and they specifically wanted to go past 16 using 16 nodes using Hyper-V. And for something like that, that's where the cluster sets would be the kind of to do an, I guess, apples to apples, competing with VMware on-prem. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first thing. The second thing that was kind of interesting is that cluster sets, if I understand, can use an SOFS kind of even with an HCI platform, where things like, if you're needing to do kind of like a quote hardware VSS, Ben Milborn, this is something I'd talk to you about, where if you want like some backup solutions, if you want to move, if you want to do the VSS, take it off and use a different proxy server to do that, you kind of need this SOFS connection into the storage, which like in a pure HCI environment, you can't.
How do you take this off?
I hope that kind of made sense. Did that all come through?
Yeah, it came through. I'm just trying to.
But I guess the biggest deal is an apples to apples replacement for VMware if we're talking about going large scale.
Yeah, because I mean that's one of the things that we are looking at, because one of the last things that we did for before we released it was there's a parameter that you can enable so that you can, if you're say draining a node in a cluster, it tries to move all the VMs to the same nodes within the same cluster. In the past, before cluster sets, if you were overextended, some VMs are going to start shutting, some lower priority VMs are going to start shutting down. With the parameters that we added, it will now actually move some of those VMs instead to a separate cluster. And that's some of the stuff we want to build upon. From the standpoint of VSS, I really haven't heard any conflicting things or anything about VSS and cluster sets specifically, because all we're doing is we're just basically a layer sitting on top of everything. Each cluster would still run just like they normally would, with all moving groups, moving VMs between themselves, rebalancing and stuff like that. That we all leave that alone. We just sit on top of it and manage. If we need to move to another cluster or anything of that nature. But I haven't heard anything from a VSS standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that the two real scenarios, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the two scenarios really for cluster sets are A, someone who wants to do exactly what you're doing, which is I want to create a really large 32, 64 node cluster for some reason. And the other one is basically where someone says, I had a 4 node or an 8 node, and I just got a new 4 node and 8 node, but the hardware is like totally different. Like the old one had some flash and some spinning disks, and the new one is an all NVMe, all flash system. And I want to be able to live migrate from one into the other, and maybe move the lower performing one back to the older system, but actually, and so they can share the consistent namespace, but I can at the same time keep the high performing one on the newer high performing cluster.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Okay. So you see that that is something you're going to expand on going forward, the cluster sets is that something that you plan on just that's baked in and we can assume that's going to be there going forward?
Oh yes.
Okay.
What you see today in 2019 is really, think of it as the first iteration of cluster sets.
Okay, great.
The engine's put in, the PowerShell's there under the hood, but we don't have the pretty UI. We don't, and so because of that, we in terms of scenarios, we're being a little cautious about what scenarios. It's really kind of an advanced feature right now for a large enterprise that really would want to create some really large clusters. What's interesting now is, and going back to something that Howard mentioned earlier, because you can buy servers now with so many cores and so much RAM and so much flash and just so many resources, 100 gig RDMA. We're seeing people, that sweet spot of 4 to 6 nodes, 4 to 8 nodes, somewhere in that, people wanting to do 64 nodes. It's very interesting. I see fewer people want to do that. 10 years ago, a server had 12 total cores in it. Now you can get a nice new server from Howard that's got hundreds of cores in a single server, and a 4 node is ridiculously powerful. So it's kind of interesting to see how people are thinking about their cluster strategy going forward. That's why I keep asking this question: is it 4 nodes? Is it 6 nodes? Is it all flash? I'm trying to kind of gauge where people's heads are at these days. And like I said, more people I see are going with smaller form factors packed with more resources, and if they can, just avoiding the hard drive altogether and going with SATA flash as their capacity and NVMe as their cache, or even Optane in some really high performance workloads like SQL, for example.
Yeah, I definitely. Hey guys, we're actually the time really flies. I feel like this virtual meetup is actually quite cool in terms of just having a webinar, and I think we're gonna do more of these. But believe it or not, we've been doing this for an hour plus now, and still going. So I think this is great, Jeff, and everybody attended. Thank you so much for trying this out as a virtual meetup. I think this is actually something I'm gonna try to adopt, because this gives a forum for everybody to chat and share experiences and for you to engage. And these are 31 enterprise customers that's deploying stores Azure Stack HCI today, that's talking and learning, and it's incredible. And Jeff, and thank you for you're gonna be back, and trust me, with this challenging days we have, we need to do more of these to continue to get feedback from our customers, real life deployment, and take that information and make sure they know what the latest is, because there's still a lot of challenges faced out there. Mohi is there deploying. Last night at 11 o'clock, he had that issue. We have Malik, who is deploying Azure Stack into Gambia Telecom. So you have people all over the place. I see people from Europe on there. So this is incredible, and hopefully you find it useful, engaging. You find a somewhere for us to make sure we continue to be connected.
Yeah, and Howard, a huge thank you to you and to everyone at DataON for this opportunity. This is, obviously this has been weird. Normally, I'd be on Ignite tour right now, kind of be going all over the world, chatting with customers face to face, talking with them about their HCI adoption and usage, and doing demos and doing stuff, and we're just having to all go with the flow here, and I really appreciate this opportunity to chat, and I'm happy to keep doing this going forward. Just one last thing, again, in terms of Azure Stack HCI, a huge thank you to everyone. We have heard your feedback loud and clear, which is, you love Azure Stack HCI and you want us to be super focused on delivering the best infrastructure product out there, and that's exactly what we're doing, and we are laser focused on that right now. Like I said, I'm at home having meetings, but we're like constantly meeting with teams about all of the things that we're doing on future development right now happening for the next release of Azure Stack HCI, and we will have lots of exciting announcements. They will be virtual this year, but I promise we have lots of exciting announcements. There's so many things happening right now that I can't wait to share them with you later in the year.
Absolutely, thank you for being here. I know you have another. Actually,
yes, I actually have another webinar.
1 o'clock. Yeah, at 1 o'clock. So for those who wants to attend and hear more stuff, and Jeff will be on there to talk. But thank you everybody for attending. Really, this is awesome, great, and stay safe, stay healthy, and make sure you drink up every day. Okay, this is a good coffee. Talk to you guys soon.
Thanks,
everyone. Folks, before everyone leaves, if you hop in the chat, there's a link. Microsoft people, cover your ears. There's a link for the Azure Stack HCI Slack channel that we mentioned a few times. It's free to join. Hop in. We'll love to see you.
Yes, that's a great place. Thanks.
Oh, come on, Ernie. Why would I close my ears to that? I'm on it. I'm on
That's
it.
Right. Hey, we communicate with our customers using every channel possible. So thanks, Ernie. Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.